I'm Eliott Rodriguez, and we're a little less than a month away from the Iowa caucuses. Right after that, candidates head to New Hampshire. Former President Donald Trump has a commanding lead in Iowa, but Nikki Haley is gaining ground in New Hampshire. Joining us now is Anthony Salvanto, the Director of Elections for CBS News. And Anthony, this poll has some good news for Nikki Haley. So does that mean she now has momentum?
It does indeed, Eliott. Look, Nikki Haley has kind of consolidated what you could describe as the non-Trump vote there in New Hampshire. He still leads, but she's bolstered by a lot of the independents who can vote in the New Hampshire primary. And compared to the other candidates, now voters tell us they see her as reasonable and also prepared to be president. So she's persuaded a lot of voters of that. In fact, she's on par there with the former president. So that's a notch for her. And also, you have to remember the New Hampshire electorate does contain not just those independents, but we find relatively more voters who say they'd be amenable to someone different than Donald Trump. So maybe an opening for her to keep it close there, Eliott.
You also find that voters in New Hampshire find Nikki Haley likable. Is that what they told you?
Indeed, she does do well on that characteristic. Now, one thing to note is that while all of these things are important, different characteristics can be primary for different kinds of voters. So by comparison, we see Donald Trump stay in the lead with two very important ones. One is Republican voters there tell us they think he is a strong leader, and he really has distance over the rest of the field on that dynamic. And then another, very important for any party that's out of the White House, is do they think they can win next November? And far and away, these voters tell us they think it is Donald Trump who has the best chance to beat Joe Biden. In fact, so many of them say they think he will definitely beat Joe Biden. So that's really important as well as the fact they tell us that they know him better and think in their minds things were better when he was president. All of that underpinning the president's base there in New Hampshire.
How do the other candidates do in a head-to-head matchup with Joe Biden?
Well, in our most recent polling, which is not this week, but very recent, Donald Trump has had a slight edge over Joe Biden in that hypothetical matchup. And one of the things we had found in that recent polling is that a lot of folks were comparing their economic status to the way they were before the pandemic. And many of them told us in the poll they felt that they might be better off economically under a hypothetical potential another Trump presidency. So that was a powerful part of the underpinning why Donald Trump had the lead in those national polls. Now, of course, I say that with the second beat here, which is that it's a year out. And there have been other Democratic candidates in the past, Democratic presidents running for re-election, who'd also trailed in the polls a year out. So it just sort of underlines the point that things can always change.
Yeah, they can indeed. We have to keep that in mind. You also asked about cultural issues like abortion and transgender survey. Any surprises there?
Yeah, and I think it illustrates one of the differences between Iowa and New Hampshire. Iowa is often a test for the further right part of the Republican base, and the candidates there that tend to do well often have appeals there. Well, you look at a couple of policy points. In Iowa, there are relatively more voters than in New Hampshire who would like the idea of making abortion illegal. There are also almost half the would-be caucus goers in Iowa who call themselves members or adherents to the MAGA movement. And that's important because it also provides a base of support for former President Trump. You compare that to the New Hampshire electorate, where you have relatively more support for, say, abortion being legal in at least some cases, and relatively fewer voters who say that they're part of the MAGA movement. So two very different states, same leader, but two very different electorates in many ways, Eliott.
Anthony, is there any good news in this poll for Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who has put so much at stake in Iowa?
Well, Donald Trump has a commanding lead in Iowa, and to the extent that we find voters are considering Ron DeSantis, even if they're not voting for him, just the bulk of them are all putting their votes into Donald Trump. In fact, there's been an increase in the number of voters who say not only are they voting for Donald Trump, but he's the only candidate that they're considering, and that's gone up 10 points. So that starts to really close the window for a candidate like Ron DeSantis, who we know is sort of running in the same lane, if you will.
Anthony, great insight into what voters are thinking. Of course, this is all 1 year out. Thank you for joining us, and we'll be talking to you moving forward in this campaign.
Thank you.